Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Gist, a limited podcast series powered by Energy Central, covering the big, bold, and impactful technological developments in geospatial information systems that are permanently altering the modern power grid. I'm Energy Central Community Manager and your host for this series, Matt Chester. Today, we're talking about a major turning point for utilities everywhere as it relates to GIS in the real world, and that's the move to Esri's Utility Network. This isn't just an upgrade, it's a game changer. The way utilities manage their networks is getting faster, smarter, more secure, and way more precise. But making the switch isn't simple. It's a big decision that requires major investment, and it's reshaping how utilities think about their data, their teams, and their futures. In today's episode, we're digging into all of that and more. What makes the utility network different? How is cutting-edge GIS technology powering a whole new era for utilities? And how is SSP Innovations making it easier, faster, and more affordable to get there, especially for smaller and mid-sized players? We'll dig into the challenges, the opportunities, and what comes next. Because ready or not, the future of utility networks is already here, and companies like SSP Innovations are helping bring it to bear. We're grateful that this episode is powered by our friends at SSP Innovations. Keep listening to hear more about their role in this massive transition. Now, let's welcome our guest, David Miller, Executive Consultant at SSP Innovations. David, welcome to The Gist.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for having me.
Of course, we're thrilled that you're here. And before we get into the meat of the matter, I want to start with some scene setting. Can you tell us what exactly is the Esri Utility Network and how does it differ from previous connected network systems like the geometric network?
So Esri's Utility Network is their next generation of topology models. And like the name suggests, it is specific for utilities, whether this is electric, gas, telco, water, sewer, any of the major utility systems. And the way this is really different than the geometric network especially is when Esri released the geometric network, which is almost 30 years old at this point, it was not released for just utilities. It was for how anyone who wanted to know how points and lines hook together and run analysis on them. So this could be roadways, this could be waterways, railroads, basically anything, like I said, points and lines hooked together. Utilities took this and built it out to a degree that Esri didn't expect. To the point Esri realized they had to make specific technologies just for utilities because just how differently this industry utilizes a GIS system with its topology model. So at its surface level, it's a lot like the geometric network, but a lot more horsepower and smarts underneath the hood to power what we need to get to in the future.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And so based on that, we understand that the utility network, it's really going to be the system for the next stage in GIS evolution. So can you expand on what really makes it distinct and specifically, how is this migration making the best of GIS technology even more available to those utilities?
Sure. So what makes it really distinct is in the past with Esri technologies, they rarely got into the verticals of specific industries. So they would provide the base technology. So I talked about geometric network being released kind of agnostically. It wasn't just meant for utilities. Well, now they're bringing in that technology that other business partners have developed over the last 30 years and tried to embed that in the utility network so that we're not so forced into having to use third-party tools along with our GIS if we didn't want to. So this includes things like how different assets hook together. What do those different assets do to whatever commodity is being modeled, whether it's gas, electric, telco, whatever. But how do these things connect? How do they interact? How does the commodity flow? So if we talk electricity, how does electricity flow through a transformer and down to services feeding homes? These are things that you actually can model and get very granular in what you can record in your GIS so that if you want to do really advanced load flow analysis or protection scheme analysis, the utility network will support that if you have the data and if you want to go that route. But it also is distinct in the fact you don't have to do all this stuff if you don't want to. You can make the best decisions for your business that if you don't have the data or you're a very small utility who doesn't worry too much about, say, ADMS, Advanced Distribution Management Systems, you don't have to particularly concern yourselves with that aspect of what the utility network can bring to bear. Now, how this is coming in from the GIS side of things is, for a long time, utilities have used GIS as kind of their mapping systems. Here's where the assets are at, and generally, here's how they're connected. And they try to feed this topology model to other systems such as ADMS, outage management systems, planning and analysis systems. Before, we would have to do some pretty complex data migrations to get this stuff out. do data conversions, dump it from one database to another big database. Now with the utility network, it's all web-based. And when the geometric network was first released, the internet wasn't something we used on a day-to-day basis for business. Now it is. So with the utility network, everything's served out through web services. So now you can serve out a lot more rich data to a lot more entities, whether this is someone using a desktop browser, someone using a desktop application, a mobile device, another enterprise system. They can consume this data because it's basically JSON underneath the hood. So if they can read JSON and understand the data structure, they can consume it and use it. So this puts GIS in a lot more battlegrounds, so to speak, out on the front lines of day-to-day utility operations and engineering operations to just get better data in front of people much quicker so that we can make better decisions quicker.
Yeah, you talked a lot about the data opportunities here, but as with any data or digital technology, I imagine it comes with some concerns about the data security. Can you speak to how the utility network comes into play there when it comes to data security?
Sure. So obviously, the security of our utility data, whether it's the electric system, gas, we don't want that falling in the hands of bad actors because they can do stuff with this and potentially cause some harm. With us being now all web-based, we're now bringing to bear basically the cutting edge technologies that you can apply to web services, web technologies. And instead of having to rely so much on your internal security systems to protect this, we can bring SSL to bear. We can bring HTTPS. We can bring all the things today that we use to protect data over the internet can be utilized against the utility network. Additionally, we can apply much more granular controls of who can access the data even within our own utilities. So if you don't want certain people to get topology data, there are ways to configure the UN and use the GIS systems to say, I only want to show this much data to this person, or I want to show this particular system to these groups of people. Now, the UN would require you to do some interesting configurations to pull some of this off, but it's very possible to serve this out much quicker to a set of stakeholders who can utilize certain sections of the data. And we can then, like I said, use our own internal IT security systems that help protect web services to secure all that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really helpful. And you touched upon this a little bit, but we are talking on a podcast called The Gist, so I want to dig further into the GIS technology part of all of this. Can you speak to how GIS tech is making all of these improvements possible with the UN?
It's not probably so much as GIS is the factor here, but it is definitely the consumption of how people consume this data. Esri just utilized what they know about making maps, getting things onto a map and displaying it to people. But then they built in the backend database to say, all right, we need to be able to support the flow of the electricity through these assets. What actually happens when you go through a step-down transformer or a step-up transformer? What can happen when you roll through a recloser and that thing decides to open because of a fault on the system? These are things that we've always had in tabular systems a lot of places when it comes to operations. So outage management, ADMS. We might see a schematic trigger and show that a circuit breaker popped open. What actually got impacted here? And a lot of utilities try to overlay this back on GIS to say, all right, if that breaker opened, these 3 square miles of our city are now without power. That involves this hospital, this grocery store, these traffic signals, maybe a police station's involved or something. So now we can visualize much better what's going on out there. And with GIS being kind of the forefront here, you can also lay in other types of data. So if you know where you have automatic vehicle locating, so you have AVL systems out there that show you where your crews are at, you can now see, here's the power outage in relation to where my crews are at. Who do I dispatch first? Who's the closest? Who has the most suited equipment to potentially deal with this problem? Additionally, if you have information about, let's say, traffic signals. I worked at a utility, and when traffic signals went out, the police wanted to be notified because they wanted to get cars out there to help start directing traffic, especially if it was a major intersection. So if you have this in your GIS, it doesn't even have to be in your utility network. It could just be on the map and say, there's a traffic signal here. If we have power outages all around it, odds are that traffic signal's out as well. Now we can employ different alerts and different notifications to people who need to go deal with that sort of thing. So GIS really is the presentation, and Esri's talked about this for a while about being the system of engagement. So if we can take the GIS data and this topology model and represent what's really going on in the real world, this just makes it much more powerful to get the operational picture of what we need to do to approach issues and just deal with day-to-day situations.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the opportunities are great. So let's actually talk about the transition to the utility network. Can you speak a little bit, David, about how utilities are approaching that switch and what that process looks like?
Well, Matt, that is a big issue for utilities right now. It seems like every 15 to 20 years, we go through just these epoch shifts of technology where a bunch of stuff was installed at the same time, whether it's the work and asset management systems, the mobile systems, SCADA, GN, the geometric network. A lot of this stuff was installed in the late 90s, early 2000s. And utilities are hitting the point where they realize we need to replace all this stuff. It's aging out. Some of it's not on support anymore. And how utilities are approaching this switch, especially for the utility network, they're trying to do it thoughtfully because they realize that there's a lot of interplays now to GIS. If a utility doesn't have many integrations, it's a little easier for them. They just have to get their data converted and migrated into the specific utility network data schema as Esri's defined it, and then roll out the new desktop applications so people can maintain and edit this stuff, then serve it out. Other utilities that are big and complex, we usually recommend that they go through and start doing a strategy and roadmap and start figuring out exactly how are their end users utilizing their GIS data, what has to be reestablished when they move to the utility network. Because as you said, this isn't an upgrade. This is a pretty major technological shift. And if you don't know how people are actually using your systems, you are going to miss something that's going to be very expensive to add on in the middle of a project because no one recognized that this was going to be an issue. So we see a lot of utilities engage in road mappings to figure out, like I said, how are they using GIS? What needs to be established? What do they want their GIS to do in the future? And then once they have that sort of plan in place, they move on to actually building out the platform, migrating data, and making sure that this new system is working just as well as their old system did. Basically reset themselves to ground zero and say, okay, we have a working GIS. We have working circuits, pressure zones, whatever that is, and we can now reestablish all our integrations, all our business processes against this new data set. So it's not always a quick process for some people. If you're very integrated, it can be long and complicated. If you're a smaller utility without a lot of integrations, it can be simpler and it can be easier, but it really just depends on how heavily utilizes your GIS system. At my old utility, we had GIS everywhere, and I know it's going to take them 2 to 3 years to go through this process because they have a lot of work to do. Other places can pull it off in a few months.
Yeah, so it's a large undertaking. So what is the role of an organization like SSP in helping utilities make that migration from geometric network to utility network? Can you talk a little bit more about your work here?
I joined SSP a little over 6 years ago, specifically around the utility network and I worked at a utility for 20 years. I did design work, engineering, operations, outage management, GIS management, GIS manager, those sorts of things. So I was specifically brought in because SSP likes having utility professionals work for them, that we generally speak the same language as our customers and can understand what's going on. When we step in, we start off with helping that communication with the end users of the GIS system, figuring out what they're doing day to day, what they want from their GIS systems, what they're trying to accomplish. And we try to set the stage and say, all right, here's all the systems you're integrated with. And then we start trying to work through their upper management to explain, yes, you set up a mapping system 20 years ago. You may not realize what you've tied this mapping system into. So it's not just mapping. It is now tied to your work management. It's tied to asset management. It's tied to mobile. It's tied to your operations. And we're trying to set the stage of showing how critical is if you knock over this one domino, you're going to spiderweb very quickly into 4 other major systems that we now have to mess with. So we try to help set the stage and explain the role of the GIS within the utility, because with how ubiquitous it even is today, I don't know if executives have realized exactly what they're using those systems for. And we try to help sell the story and explain why are we spending these dollars now. Once we have that stage set, people will hire us to do the actual system design, building out the system infrastructure, configuring things, customizing things. We have products that work with the utility network. We'll go through and do organizational change management. We'll do business practice, process design. We'll do data migration, data remediation. We'll provide after go live support. We'll do the go live, basically end-to-end services for a utility. When it comes to the utility network, we can handle it from the very infancy of a project all the way through 2 years past go live, and things are just evolving and they need more enhancements done to the system.
So this all sounds like a really major undertaking, and you said as much. So it makes me wonder what the typical look of utilities are that are making the switch. Does it still require an immense staff, the millions of dollar budget, and what is that level of investment, and what makes that investment worthwhile?
Early on, when the utility network first came out, and it's been out for about 6-7 years now, which in the Esri space still makes it fairly young. Early on, yes, it was lots of staff, millions of dollars to migrate even the smallest of utilities. Since SSP has been working in this arena now, before the start of the UN, we've been working with Esri since, I say, 2015, 2016. We have learned a lot about the utility network, and we have figured out ways to configure this thing that makes it a lot faster and easier for smaller utilities to make this migration. So we have this offering we call SSP Accelerate. And this thing is a services packages where we come in and do a couple days of consulting to explain, here's what the UN is, here's what you're getting with this offering, here's what's not included in this offering. And then we will go through a data migration, data remediation plan to say, here's the things that won't work in your data based on how you're configured today. Then we go through mock migrations to move more towards a production system, establish the new systems, a production and a development system. We add in our SSP productivity add-in tool, which runs on top of the Arc Pro application, which is what a lot of the editors use to interact and maintain the utility network day to day. Get this all configured, get it stood up, train a handful of users on how to use Pro, productivity, and the UN, get people live. And this is a sliding scale based on the number of customers you have. So if you have 100,000 meters or less, we have a flat fee for that. If it's moving up 100,000 to, I want to say, 100 or 250,000 meters, it's another cost. And we tried to make it very affordable. So we have figured out ways to configure this utility network to make it more right-sized for the smaller entities and make it so it's more easily consumable, easier to move, easier to understand. Because Esri, God bless them, they try to offer starter packs and some starter templates. They're still very complex. And it's very hard to consume unless you know this data and these systems very well. That's where SSP stepped up and says, we need to make something that's easier to digest for people, that they can make this move and not feel committed to having to spend all these dollars and spend all this time with it. So it's been a very exciting offering so far and been very well received. We've had a number of small entities take advantage of this. And we've actually had people take advantage of this in such a way that instead of trying to set up a production system to get to the UN, they use this as getting themselves a sandbox that they can now build integrations against, work with, and then they bring us back in to just say, can you do one last data migration? We trust our integrations work. We've tested out our business processes. We want to now go live with this thing. So that gives someone runway. We can get you set up with a development system sandbox running in 3 months. You can spend another year building out integrations, and then we help you do one last push to make it a true production system.
Do you find those smaller utilities, are they surprised to find, oh, this actually is accessible to us? Or are they coming to you not necessarily expecting it'll be that easy?
We've had people who have dug into the utility network who have been very concerned about the level of effort, especially when they see how the data model changes with the UN, that they are surprised how quick and easy it can be. And they're also a little suspicious going, is this trapping me with SSP? And we're like, no, you still have, this is straight Esri data. You can use it however you want. We're just helping you get there easier and quicker. It's difficult. Even with these smaller dollars we're talking about, funding for this sort of effort is hard. And sometimes we still have to go through the effort of helping them get executive support and buy-in and make them understand, here's what it would cost if you don't use this type of service. Here's what it costs with our service. Here's the things you're risking by not doing this work. Because ultimately, that's where the cost lies is, sure, they can go off of support. The geometric network, ArcMap, go off support in a couple more years, 2028. Doesn't mean stuff stops working, but it just means if things break, no one's going to help you unless you spend big dollars. And if you have a mission critical system tied to your GIS that goes down because GIS went offline, the cost of not doing the UN and getting on supported platforms and supported software, that's what you're risking. The cost of if things go bad, what are you going to pay to get yourself back up and running?
Well, David, as we start to wrap up this conversation, the natural last question that I have for you is, what's next? What are you and your team most excited for as more utilities make the switch to the utility network via, leveraging SSP's opportunities?
The one I find the most interesting that's been coming up a lot, there's two things actually, I should say. One is once you establish a utility network, it tracks everything that's ever edited against it. So if you have it running for a decade, you can actually pinpoint a time segment that says, what was our load? What did the system look like back in July of 2025? I want to run an analysis against that. Before, we'd have to go mine data source and says, does anyone have a copy of what the GIS looked like back then? Now with the UN, you can just go back to that timestamp, pull the model, and run the analysis. And you can do comparison analysis against different timestamps in your history. Additionally, the other really cool thing that the UN does natively that the topology stuff couldn't do before, it supports 3D modeling. So if a utility does get to the point where they actually have 3D assets, they could conceivably view their data in 3D and see how far below grade is this conductor? What's the sag of this particular cable going over this roadway, and what's our ground clearance? Some utilities have aspirations to get there. It is a lot of work, but the capabilities of the UN support it. It's there, and I'm really excited just to see where people take these ideas, because ultimately GIS is just a technology enabler, a business enabler, but it takes those people to actually bring the ideas to fruition. It takes work, it takes effort, but these people have some amazing ideas that I would really love to see them get to a real world state that people utilize day to day and can make some amazing technology decisions out there and just business decisions based on this data.
Yeah, no, David, I think that's a terrific note to end on. We have the technology, but then it's about the creative people and the innovators to make the most out of it. So that's wonderful to hear. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today on The Gist. It's been wonderful to learn more about your work, and we're incredibly grateful for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the time as well.
Of course. And as I mentioned at the top, this episode wouldn't be possible without SSP. SSP Innovations is a leading Esri Platinum partner serving the electric and gas utility industries. Electric and gas utilities across North America can trust SSP for strategic consulting, GIS and data managed services, utility network migrations, system integration, and long-term support. From the introduction of the utility network platform, SSP has led the way with strategic consulting, data preparation, and implementation services. Many of the largest utility companies in North America have chosen SSP for their utility network migration projects and celebrated their successful completion. So thank you once again to SSP Innovations for joining us today. And as a reminder to our listeners, we've got just one more episode of The Gist left, so don't miss our big finale of The Gist coming soon. Hit subscribe to this feed to catch up on all of our podcasts and stay tuned for our next episode. And be sure to share an episode with a friend or a coworker, and then head to Energy Central for even more insights on this technology that's moving the power industry forward. See you next time.